Welcome, everybody. You're signing into the Silver Hill Hospital Grand Rounds. We'll get started in just a moment as people settle into their Zoom situations. All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. I am Dr. Jeff Katzman. I'm the Director of Education here at Silver Hill Hospital, and we are absolutely delighted to have you join us and privileged to welcome Dr. Claudia Gold, who will be presenting on the topic, The Power of Discord, a relational model of mental health care rooted in the developmental science of early childhood. And I have the pleasure of introducing her in a moment, but first, a little bit of housekeeping. We have our next Grand Rounds on June 12th, when we'll welcome Dr. Charles Dyke, who's going to be presenting to us on the interesting topic of pathological lying, a case for inclusion in the DSM. And additionally, we have some presentations outside of our Grand Rounds program. Coming up is Dr. Emily Haas, who's going to present to us on Could It Be Trauma? She's the leader of our Triumph program that was created for treating patients with trauma and dissociation. And the program is on May 29th from noon to 1, and the link can be found on our website at Silver Hill. And that one is not for credits because it's outside of our Grand Round program. For today's lecture, your questions, as always, are an important part of our Grand Rounds. I'll be moderating a Q&A discussion with Dr. Gold at the conclusion of her presentation, and it's a great opportunity to put questions out there and comments for Dr. Gold, and you can submit those anytime during the lecture, and please do using the Q&A link. If you'd like to receive CME or CEU credits, please complete the evaluation survey that will automatically show in your browser when we end the webinar today. And we'll also email a copy of the survey to today's participants, to all of you. And finally, disclosures. No planners of this activity have indicated a relevant financial relationship with an ACCME defined commercial interest. And now it is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce our guest speaker today. That's Dr. Claudia Gold, who is a pediatrician and writer who practiced general and behavioral pediatrics for over 20 years and now specializes in infant parent mental health. She's on the faculty at the Early Relational Health Fellowship Program at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School and the Brazelton Institute at Boston's Children's Hospital. She graduated from the University of Chicago and University of Pritzker School of Medicine, and she's a clinician with Volunteers in Medicine Berkshires and director of the Hello It's Me project, a program designed to bring early relational health principles to high-need, low-resource communities. She's an author, the author of 4 books, most recently a book that I very much enjoyed and recommend, The Power of Discord, with co-author Ed Tronick, with a new book, Getting to Know You, Lessons in Early Relational Health from Infants and Caregivers, from the Teachers College Press. That's coming out in 2025. She speaks frequently to a variety of audiences, both lay and professional, and writes regularly for her blog, Child in Mind. And with that, it is really an honor, Dr. Gold, to welcome you. Thank you for accepting our invitation to speak to us at our Grand Rounds today, and great getting to know you. I pass the baton to you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be here. I was saying in our chat before we started that I worked with Dr. Gerber very closely a number of years ago, and it always is a real treat for me to talk about the relevance of infant mental health, early relational health to clinical work with adults. So I particularly welcomed this invitation to speak with you today. I have no disclosures to give, and just to review my intentions for our time together is to recognize the value of working from a stance of not knowing, to describe the role of mismatch and repair in healthy and derailed infant development, and to define trauma-informed care from the perspective of meaning-making in relationships. So I'm going to just take a little bit deeper dive into my background. which is that I did general pediatrics for about 2 decades. I was on the front lines going to deliveries in the middle of the night back in the day before hospitalists. And while I was doing that in my small town in rural Western Massachusetts, the Berkshire Psychoanalytic Institute opened down the road from me at Austin Riggs, and I started studying there. And I was open to a whole world of research and knowledge that is generally siloed from pediatricians. And there I learned about what at the time was called infant parent mental health, but is now in the process of being rebranded as early relational health. And I'm going to use that term a couple of times. So I just want to tell you, I don't know if people in the audience are familiar with this term. So I'm just going to take a moment to describe it. It's really not a new idea. It's not any new research, but it really is a kind of conceptualization of the centrality of relationships between caregivers and very young children for future health development and social emotional well-being. So I often say that the reason, like, who am I to be talking about this? I think the thing that I learned most profoundly occurred when I would go to deliveries in the middle of the night, and I would be there when a caregiver met their baby, and the enormous transformative energy of that process was really what gave me the idea of this concept, which I'm now going to go into, about the not knowing stance. Because right from birth, babies are extraordinary in their capacity to communicate purpose and intention. And they're all different from each other. And it can be hard to figure out what they're saying. This photo, I should say, is my granddaughter. And it's literally hours after birth. And you can, if you could give voice to what she's saying, she might, this is her parent who she's looking at, and she's saying, "Now, who exactly are you?" So right from birth begins this process of caregiver, or I would say, you know, in the case of adoption, when the caregiver and the child first meet, this process of getting to know each other begins. And the thing that I will dive into throughout this presentation is that caregivers frequently miss their infant signals. But that's good, actually, because through these missed signals, as infant and caregiver move through misunderstanding to understanding, that's how their connection deepens. And while their connection is deepening, the baby is also getting a clearer sense of who they are, that this kind of hopeful way of being in the world and saying, "I am me." So I think rather than make this so abstract, it helps to actually look at a baby. So I'm going to show you this brief video. This is me doing a newborn behavioral observation in the home of a 3-day-old. And so you'll see, you know, the human newborn is really uniquely helpless, yet highly social. And they experience relationships not in words, but in their body. So I'm just going to show you this short video.
He's so awake, we call the orienting items, and sort of how he listens to your voice. And I just see, looking at him, he's just incredibly alert and engaged and wide awake. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold him and have him talk to him.
Ruben. Hi, baby boy. Hi. Oh, yeah, you can hear me? Yes. Do you recognize my voice? Do you recognize my voice? I'm your Ema. I'm your Ema.
Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn him
And baby boy. Baby boy. Yeah. Yeah. You recognize my voice? Yeah. Hi. Hi. I'm your Ema. Yes. 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 Yeah. How you doing? Are you a happy boy? Are you a happy boy?
So he really so attentive to that very familiar voice that he's
Yeah.
listening to.
Yeah.
And let's see, okay, what you do looking at just a face. Now I know I'm not nearly as interesting as your mom. Let's let's see what you do with your eyes and voice. You're making me poopy while I'm talking. Yes, you're multitasking.
That's
Hi,
very
Ruby.
good.
Hi, Ruby. You can follow me all the way over here. Look at how you can do that. And you're actually trying to talk to me. Hi, Ruby. Let's go back over this way. Hi, Ruby. Oh, we're having a real conversation. Look at that. You are such a little person already.
So at the very end, I say to him spontaneously, "You're such a little person already." And I think that that phrase really captures what I'm trying to say. And the other thing, in addition to recognizing this process of caregiver and baby getting to know each other, is the more clinical work I did, the more I realized that when I didn't know what I was doing and I let myself not know what I was doing, that was when I was really allowed into the family's story. And I use this term, playing in the uncertainty. And if we think of play in very broadly as spontaneous, loosely organized behavior with no specific objective or consequence, it is by nature uncertain. So this is kind of, is certainly for physicians, this is really the opposite of the way we were trained. We were trained to be the expert, to know what to do, that people come to us, they look for a diagnosis, an intervention, they look for instruction. And this, I found over and over again that this approach was failing. Both for me, I felt frustrated, and my families that I was working with on the front lines of my pediatric practice were similarly frustrated. So I began to intentionally let go of that stance to instead embrace the not knowing stance. And just one of the great influences on my professional life is the pediatrician turned psychoanalyst E.W. Winnicott. And in a lovely essay entitled Advising Parents, where he actually is suggesting not to advise parents, he has this wonderful line, "I do not wish to carry this attitude to absurd lengths." So many of you in the audience have many different roles in relation to your clients, and there are plenty of times where you do need to know what to do. But I am saying that in really supporting healing relationships, there is great power in letting go of the expert stance. And I am very much influenced by another psychoanalyst, Wilfred Bion, who is most famous for this idea of entering a session without memory or desire, meaning you are simply being present for whatever happens. And this is a quote from him: "The only point of importance in any session is the unknown. Nothing must be allowed to distract from intuiting that. In any session, evolution takes place. Out of the darkness and formlessness, something evolves." And so what I've come to understand and to speak more and more about is how the not knowing stance not only finds the right door to let us in, but allows us to gain a client's trust to lead us to deeper layers of the story over time. So just as an example, now, most of my examples, because I'm a pediatrician, are with families with young children. So for example, I saw a family where their toddler's meltdowns in the grocery store were what they came to see me for. But as I got to know the family, I uncovered a deeper problem of domestic violence, creating an environment of stress. And that problem in turn was embedded in the unrelenting stress of this family in the process of seeking asylum as an undocumented immigrant. So all of these issues have relevance, and it is our job to let the family lead us to what is most salient to them. And so I propose what I call listening in as an organizing frame. And what listening in is listening with an intentional suspension of expectation and a willingness to be surprised. In place of certainty, it embraces a humbleness of not knowing. And most importantly, it calls for us to allow ourselves to feel awkward and uneasy, to make mistakes as we try to find our way into another person's experience. So now that I've given you a frame for what I mean by the not knowing stance, I'm going to offer some evidence and embed this construct in 3 core early relational health principles. And the one I'm going to spend the most time on is the repair theory of human development. And as Dr. Kessman mentioned this book, I wrote this with Ed Tronick. So the process of writing the book itself was a lesson in the value of mismatch and repair, because believe me, there were many, many very messy moments in our process together. But I think I can say that we ended up with what we're both pretty pleased with the product. And I'm going to go through in the next section the core ideas that are represented in the book. And I've mentioned to you how much Winnicott has been an influence on my thinking. And there actually, I often think, and Ed gets embarrassed when I say this, but that Winnicott's ideas are in some ways a kind of precursor to what Dr. Tronick then documented with research evidence. And this is one of my favorite Winnicott quotes. "I would rather be the child of a mother who has all the inner conflict of a human being than be mothered by someone for whom all is easy and smooth, who knows all the answers and is a stranger to doubt." And this is, we reference this concept in the book, The Power of Discord, that it's actually the idea that imperfections are not only okay, but they are essential. So what I've done is to distill all of Dr. Tronick's decades and decades of research into 4 core points in what is termed the repair theory of human development. And these are the 4 core points. Healthy relationships are characterized not by perfect attunement, but by a messy process of mismatch and repair. This continuous process builds resilience and trust, and the capacity for both self-regulation and intimacy grow from moment-to-moment interactions in our earliest relationships. These experiences change our brain and body, organizing the way we function in relationships throughout our lives. So I'm going to show you a brief video and just as you're watching it, just think about the points that I made, and then we'll come back to that.
Yo, comedian Michael Jr. here. As you know, I just flat out enjoy doing comedy. But one of the things I love way more than that is being a dad. Not too long ago, I'm going through some video footage and I run into this video of my youngest daughter being born. Now, of course, I was there, I actually took the video, but I had never really experienced it from this perspective before. Now look, we're in the hospital room, she's sticky and she's baby and all that stuff, and she's in the middle of crying. And then I speak up, I start talking to her, and watch how she responds when she hears my voice. Okay, Portland, look, I'm right here. It's okay, it's okay. I'm right here, I'm right here. We're doing just fine. It's okay. It's okay, I'm right here. Right here, yeah, it's okay. It's okay, baby, it's okay. That was pretty awesome. So check it. A few minutes later, the nurse starts working on her, puts her pamper on her, and I'm not saying anything, and she actually starts to cry again. Then I speak up, she hears my voice, and stops crying. Like again. But I want you to notice what else happens after I tell her that I love her.
Mom hold you.
Portland, it's okay. It's okay. It's good. It's good. It's good. I'm right here. I'm right here. I am right here. I love you. I love you. I love you. Yeah, I'm right here. I'm right here. It's okay. It's okay. That's just phenomenal.
So I think that video where you see how the relationship between them leads to the baby self-regulation, as represented by the way her movements still, and also intimacy, because she opens her eyes and looks at her father. And this is just an excerpt from the new book. that I think captures how much you learn from this video. I show the video in a seminar for young dance teachers struggling to manage the emotional dysregulation of their students in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. I wanted to take them inside the origins of our capacity for intimacy and self-regulation. I hope to offer insight into what their students, many in a regressed and vulnerable state, might need, namely their full emotional presence and calm, familiar voice. One of the students, my students, I should say, not the dance students, quietly began to weep. Imagine, she said through her tears when I asked if she would be willing to share her experience with the group, a baby who does not have someone to hold them in that gentle and loving way. So this theory has tremendous implications for how we support the full range of clients. And it shows us that when early interactions, as this dance teacher hypothesized, that were lacking in robust repair may lead to emotional suffering and derailed development. But what that means is that new sets of relationships with different quality of interaction can promote healing and growth throughout the lifespan. And I'm going to come back to this theme again and again. So the infant and the caregiver influence and change each other in moment-by-moment interaction. And this microscopic interactive process embeds meaning in the child's body and brain well before they develop the capacity for language. So what is the evidence? This is Dr. Tronick's famous still face paradigm. And I hope many of you have seen it. I'm just going to give a little bit of a kind of a warning. If you haven't seen it, sometimes it's kind of disturbing, but have no fear. I will give you hope after you watch it. And I'll just tell you about where this came from. So back in the 70s, the kind of standard thinking about development was that caregivers and infants are kind of in this perfect dance of attunement, and that the infant is really a passive recipient of the interaction. So whatever the caregiver does, the infant will do back in this kind of perfect dance. And I have to say that is somewhat true in thinking in psychology today. But when Dr. Tronick went on rounds with Dr. Brazelton and he saw things like what I showed you in that first video, he said, oh, that's just not right. The baby is an active player in the relationship right from the beginning. So being an experimental psychologist, he set up an experiment where he would have the baby and the caregiver interact as they typically do. And then he would have the caregiver make their face still. And then after a certain amount of time, their face would reanimate. So this is a little sample video of that.
Hi, sweetheart. Yes, you're doing super. Sleepy kid, roast beef. The sleepy kid done, and the sleepy kid went. Woo! There you go. Yes. What a good girl. There you go. Wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round.
Oops. Okay, I think I ended it a moment
Hi.
soon, but I'll just tell you what happens is that the baby hesitates when the mom's voice and face become reanimated, the baby hesitates for like a split second, and then immediately they're right back in that playful, joyful interaction. So Dr. Tronick says that his students are the ones that react most strongly to this because they kind of identify with the feeling, the experience of loss. But actually, I've learned that this is primarily a message of hope, because what you learn from this is that the baby, who doesn't have any language or really capacity for complex thought, far from just following the caregiver, brings out this whole array of tools to engage the parent. You know, they wave the arms. He's like, hey, look at me. You know, so that kind of agency lives in the baby's body already at this very young age. And likely the reason for that is that this is a very familiar experience, because in the moment by moment interaction, the caregiver misses the baby frequently. And it's just the experiment, the still face experiment, just magnifies that difference so that you can see it. But actually the very robust, hopeful reaction of the baby shows that she knows what to do. And likely this has happened hundreds of thousands of times in this relationship with her caregiver. And I already sort of alluded to this, but in his subsequent research, when Dr. Tronick did these micro analyses of interactions between infants and caregivers, he expected this dance of perfect attunement, but he found that actually in 70% of interactions, the infant and the caregiver are mismatched. At first, he thought this was error, but as this was repeated over and over and has subsequently been repeated in many different contexts, it became very clear that disconnection was an inevitable part of the interaction. So why is that? Well, it all comes down to the power of repair. So you have to have a mismatch in order to have the energy that the repair offers. So when you mismatch, the repair leads to that feeling of pleasure, trust, and security, and an internal sense of hope. I can overcome problems. I know what to do when something bad happens. And it teaches this critical life lesson that a negative feeling can be transformed into a positive feeling when two people achieve a match, and that countless repairs build a core sense of agency and hope. So when we see families, whether they're young children or adults, there have been atypical experiences of repair, which may be due to caregiver factors or infant factors, or both. So for the caregiver, simply being preoccupied, or not simply, being preoccupied with their own troubled relationship, an anxious mother who intrusively anticipates her baby's every need, caregivers under the influence of substances, or simply a parent who's got several young children and is too overwhelmed and chronically exhausted to repair these mismatches. Those things are examples of what may lead to atypical experiences of repair. But there are also factors in the infant. An infant whose signals are difficult to read, an infant who's highly sensitive to a range of sensory input are two examples. So in the video I showed of the example of the still face, that's a robust, healthy parent-infant pair. And I actually would not show you a video of a still face with a depressed mother, because unless we were in a more intimate setting, because those are really, really, really hard to watch. And you see, even at a very young age, that the baby has made different meaning of the relationship. They don't have that robust, like, hey, look at me kind of reaction. They suck on their hand, they may look down. There were more mismatches that took longer to repair. So even in a baby as young as 6 months, you see that this way of interacting has already been incorporated to the sense they make of themselves in the world. And since I think many of you work with adults, I had fun going back in our book to a part that I hadn't really looked at in a long time, which relates to issues of transference and countertransference. So in the research lab, where Dr. Tronick was having his research assistants interact with babies and videotape the babies. The research assistants got frustrated working with the babies of the depressed mothers, but they didn't think it was the baby's fault. They thought it was their fault. They thought there was something wrong with them, that they couldn't get these babies to engage with them. And then they got, the play was less joyful, and then that led to further disconnection. And you can see that the baby's behavior with the research assistants could be understood as an early form of transference, that the baby interacted with the research assistant in the same way they did with their caregiver. And then the research assistant's behavior could be viewed as a form of countertransference. I'm going to link that back to how this makes sense for the people who are clinicians working with their clients. Then when people are stuck in negative patterns of interaction as adults, often is because they transfer patterns from other relationships, making it difficult to connect with people in front of them. And that's the work we're doing, is to help them with that. And so, but in the therapeutic relationship, ideally, it doesn't always work this way, the therapist is aware of their countertransference, and it gives them insight into their client's experience of their wider social world. So rather than that sort of out of awareness experience that the research assistants had, ideally, the clinician is aware of this and can bring it to light. And I'm going to go into this in some detail in a moment, these mismatches and repair in therapy are essential to the therapeutic process. And this is just an example of a still face moment in therapy. I'm sure many of you have had this experience where you just look at your watch very in a millisecond, and your patient completely becomes dysregulated. And so that might be a reenactment of a reaction to a caregiver who, was emotionally unavailable, whatever it is. But in the therapeutic setting, you can actually name it and talk about it, and then the experience can lose its power. All right, so now I'm going to be brave and share a story with you, because I thought, well, I'd really love to share a story of mismatch repair in work with an adult. But all of my work is with children. So I have many, many cases working with parents who are the adults, but the child is always part of the story. So I thought, well, how can I give you a case that's just an adult? So I had written this up on my blog a number of years ago. So I thought, well, I'm going to use myself as a case example of mismatch repair and therapeutic change. So I'm just going to read you this. And this is actually, it's a combination of the version that's on my blog and the version that's going to be in the new book. So here goes. My therapy ended over a decade ago. I now recognize that its enduring impact on my emotional well-being lies not primarily in the story I told in words, but in the countless moments of moving from misunderstanding to understanding strung together over time. The microscopic mismatches in interactions contained in the office, as well as some massive disruptions, changed the nature of my sense of self and my relationship with people close to me. Just a little theory here. Winnicott described how his patients would regress to dependence in their relationship with him, offering him a window into their early life. At the time I began therapy at the age of 40, I appeared to have a well-functioning life with a good marriage, a successful career, and 2 healthy young children. Yet from the very first session, I struggled to hold myself together between appointments. I could behave as others around me expected, but inside I felt like I was falling apart. When I entered his office, I immediately felt safe and whole. A video I use, the one I just showed you, when I teach about repair theory, shows a father comforting his newborn daughter, helping her to become still and calm simply by speaking to her. The image resonates for me. The forgotten appointment occurred several years into our work together. It was early on a Friday morning, and he had rescheduled from our original time because he was running a conference. That morning, as I took the familiar drive past sheep farms through the rolling hills, I imagined our upcoming conversation. My mind was already in that safe space of his office, but I arrived to discover a locked door. In retrospect, I see it represented a mismatch of the magnitude seen in the still face experiment. I struggled to make meaning of the situation. My first reaction was terror. Winnicott used the lovely phrase going on being to capture the way we hold onto a coherent sense of self in the face of stress and disruption, an experience that develops in the earliest interactions between parent and infant. That phrase could be applied to my state of mind. He formulated the idea in terms of actual minutes. He described how when the mother is away for X plus Y minutes, the baby can hold on to her image. But when she is gone for X plus Y plus Z minutes, the baby is unable to hold on to that image. And from the infant's perspective, it is as if she no longer exists. The experience of X plus Y plus Z can produce in the baby an unthinkable anxiety that he himself no longer exists. That phrase could apply to my state of mind as I made concerted effort to behave normally while I waited to hear from my therapist. My sense of going on being faltered as minute after minute passed, and I had no idea what had happened. When after what felt like an eternity, but was actually a few hours, he called to apologize, my terror turned quickly into rage. How could you forget me? The relationship felt good enough for me to unleash my full fury. Rather than smooth things over, we got into the mess, navigating the conflict to repair our relationship and move forward. For many years, I had attributed the significance of this interaction to the narrative. I learned that the morning of the forgotten appointment, he was interviewing a Holocaust survivor. My father is a Holocaust survivor, though I had rarely up to that point in my therapy spoken about that history. But now, over 15 years later, I see the meaning not primarily in the explanation of the forgotten appointment, but in the repair of this real relationship in real time. In a developmental process, the repeated moving from feeling disconnected and alone to calm and safe became part of my sense of self. I can draw on the memory, the bodily sense of wholeness in an instant, no words required. I can be fully present in a difficult experience, whether in my own internal struggles or in relationship with another person, knowing that there will come a time when it ends and healing will happen. In those countless moments of mismatch and repair, I discovered hope. So I hope that my story, as well as my overview of the concept of mismatch and repair and the repair theory of human development, gives you a good understanding of its relevance. But as Dr. Tronick is known to say, it's complicated. And while my work is very much organized around the repair theory of human development, that is not the only theory. And I think we all have to be very careful in our work not to become wedded to any one particular theory. So what I'm going to do in the next little section is to just take you on a very brief tour of two other areas of research that have relevance to the work and to the concept of the not knowing stance. So the first, and probably this is familiar to many of you, so that's why I'm going to just only spend a short amount of time on it. The concept of mentalization and reflective functioning, which is a uniquely human ability to attribute motivations and intentions to one's own and others' behavior. And it's a developmental achievement that evolves over time in the context of primary caregiving relationships. And it actually has a lot of overlap with the repair theory. And I've had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Fonagy and Dr. Tronick teach together. It's really fun. And when I first discovered all this work, I thought this was everything. And that was my first book, was about promoting parental reflective functioning, because it was this great discovery in my work that this is what it was all about. But that's not what it's all about. However, it is a very important part. And the way I see it is that mentalization opens the door to mutual regulation. And the caregiver and the baby have their own set of meanings and intentions and motivations, and they find each other in the mismatch repair process, and their connection strengthens and deepens. So they're two very closely related concepts, and also very closely related to what I started with, the not knowing stance. And because the idea of not misunderstanding to understanding is really at the core of mentalization, that you can say, I don't really know what's in your mind, but I'm going to mess around and see if I can find my way into your experience. And then the third, just that I have to mention, certainly I learned certain things in the fellowship where I was a student and now I'm on the faculty. And when I discover these things, I feel like I just can't leave certain things out. And one of them is Steve Porges's work on the polyvagal theory, which I also hope some of you are familiar with, which describes the autonomic nervous system as a frontline meaning-making system. And so this has a lot of relevance for our clinical work, because when our clients or we don't feel safe, this heightened physiologic state prevents us from making meaning of our world through social relationships. So when I talk about safety, especially nowadays, I like to be clear that I'm not talking about safety in the cortex. I'm not talking about microaggressions, trigger warnings, cognitive concepts that are rooted in the higher centers of the brain. I'm talking about a pre-verbal meaning making in the autonomic nervous system. So what is the polyvagal theory? Certainly when I was in medical school, we learned the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system as the two ways we make meaning. So when you're under the influence of the parasympathetic system, you can be connected, you feel safe, you can gaze into a person's eyes, our bodies relax to receive a hug. And the sympathetic nervous system triggers the classic fight-flight response. But what Porges identified initially in his research with premature babies was that there's actually a third option mediated by another branch of the vagus nerve, which he calls the primitive vagus, which leads to kind of the opposite reaction of the fight-flight response. And that, which is like a stilling, a lowering of the heart rate, drop in blood pressure, and kind of a stillness of the muscles of the face and voice, which in psychology we refer to as dissociation. And he described neuroception, which is different from conscious perception, but the way we assess the safety of a situation. I'm actually going to skip this slide in the interest of time. So the not knowing stance creates an environment of safety that can allow the smart vagus to be engaged, because clients who come to us often are feeling a sense of threat. And if we just ask them questions and talk at them, then we perpetuate that sense of threat. Whereas the not knowing stance can allow the sense of threat to subside. This is another quote from the book. If lack of opportunity for repair, just trying to tie all of these ideas together, if lack of opportunity for repair has left a client experiencing their social world as threatening, the primitive vagal system has likely been overactive for years as a form of protection. The body says the world is dangerous, and the interpretation becomes a way of being in all situations. In the therapeutic setting, the reliability of the time, the rhythm or prosody of the practitioner's voice allows the smart vagus to come online. So what this calls for in our work is that we need to take a moment to breathe and calm ourselves before going into a room, because we're often also under threat of many pressures from a waiting room full of patients or all sorts of other things. So the bottom line is from Dr. Porges is the feeling of safety is the treatment. So now I've reviewed the repair theory of human development, the concept of facilitating reflective functioning, and the importance of safety as really three core principles of early relational health that all can be organized around this core concept of listening in and the not knowing stance. So now for the final section, as promised, I'm going to suggest a rethinking of the concept of trauma-informed care and root it in typical healthy development. So I think the core lesson from the repair theory of human development is, as I've said again and again, is that countless moments of interaction create meaning. And so trauma is not a thing, one thing that happens, but it's actually a developmental process. And I find that this ubiquitous and nonspecific use of the term trauma-informed risks making it hollow while also serving to pathologize human experience. And I love this term healing center engagement that Sean Ginwright has proposed, because the word engagement captures the concept of an interactive process. That's one benefit of this model of moving away from trauma-informed, which suggests that you are like the worst thing that happened to you. And just the idea of diagnosis has a flavor of that, like, this is what's wrong with you, even though that's helpful. The problem is when you think about all the developmental theory that I've just described to you, a diagnostic label describes a moment in time in what is actually an evolving, ongoing developmental process. So I think it's more helpful, and this is, you know, I do work very closely with Dr. Tronick, and he's been writing a lot about this, especially in light of the fact that trauma-informed care is heard everywhere. And so this is a quote from a recent article of his. The repetition turns the trauma into the individual's way of experiencing and being in the world. While becoming traumatized is hardly a game, the process of making meaning of it and of a game such as peekaboo is pretty much the same. At the heart of similarity is the repetition of the meaning-making process. And he talks about what if it's a slap rather than peekaboo, and if the slap is unpredictable, and that environment, the baby, when they grow up, might not say that was trauma, that was life. This was how they live their life. So the implication is that when we want to change meaning, we have to think of it as being like peekaboo. And I watched my husband teach my then 4-month-old granddaughter to play peekaboo, and you see that it involves the whole being, and it's over and over and over again. So the body needs to come into it, and many different relationships. So when we think of trauma-informed care, I think it's helpful to think of it as making new meanings. And if meaning is distorted, then countless new moment-to-moment interactions in many relationships are how we make new meanings. So just want to mention the term moment of meaning, coined by infant researcher Lou Sander, which he described as a moment when infant and caregiver feel fully recognized. And it is a moment in time, an evolving process of missed cues and miscommunications. And the reason I use that term, because I think it can be extremely organizing in our clinical work, because many of us work in many different contexts, but probably all of us encounter what feel like overwhelming and overwhelmingly challenging circumstances. And I find that grounding yourself in this concept of a moment of meaning, being present for this moment of moving through mismatch and repair, can be very grounding. And the idea that as these moments are strung together, they shift meanings from anger and disconnection to hope and belonging. And early experience, you all probably know this, is not baked in the cake and changes throughout our lifespan. So just to tie it all together, this is my new and improved definition of trauma-informed care. Listening from a stance of not knowing, with the aim of facilitating moments of meeting over time to create new meanings of hope and belonging. So, wow, I have a whole 12 minutes, and in theory, I'm at the end of my talk, but I have what my yoga teacher refers to as the extra special bonus moment. And that is, again, referring to Dr. Tronick, is complicated. So Dr. Tronick and I had our own little mismatch, which is not yet repaired, because I said to him, where does loss fit in? Can we think about, and maybe I'm hearing echoes of Bowlby, who was one of the first influences on me, is the mismatch a form of loss? And so we debated this, and I'm trying in my own work to really incorporate this, because I think that it's very important. So just, and it's not just me who thinks this. One of my colleagues, Martin Cooperman, is known to say all emotional suffering is about loss and all therapy is about mourning. And then many, many years, decades, centuries before that, the Sufi Muslim poet Rumi said, the cure for the pain is the pain. So what I found, in addition to learning all of this wonderful material from all these leading researchers in developmental science, I was having my own experience seeing families. And I recognized that the most important item in my office was a box of tissues. And I was actually, for a little bit of time, I was doing some consultation in Boston, and I was using someone else's office. So I would have to get the office all set up before the families came. And sometimes I would forget, and I would find that to be so disruptive, because what I wanted was, when feelings of grief erupted, I wanted not to be looking around for where was the box of tissues. And I wanted it to be where the client could reach them, so that I didn't have to give them the communication, no, it's not okay that you make a mess here in my office. And so I've talked about this concept of listening in, at its essence, calling for a willingness to be surprised. And what I've found is that the surprise is so often an unexpected and unexpressed well of grief. And so someone will just be talking, and all of a sudden their voice will crack in an effort to suppress the pain. And these become the most transformative moments in the work. So I've had these conversations with Dr. Tronick. How do we connect this with the repair theory? So this is my efforts at that. It's that over and over in relationships, individuals have microscopic experiences of loss. Where did you go is followed soon by there you are. And as that happens, the relationship develops an identity of its own that lives in the individual person. But when relationships lack in mismatch and repair, mourning may be blocked. The where did you go remains with insufficient memory of there you are. And lacking in that microscopic experience of surviving loss, the mind and body may react with a protective form of denial. And these protective mechanisms deprive an individual of the healing power of the release and sense of connections that accompany mourning. So what can happen is that anger and unfulfilled longing prevent access to feeling of sadness. And the ability to mourn calls for the experience of a relationship that can live on in the face of loss. So my thought is that what we're doing in our work is creating relationships that offer space for grieving loss. And now I'm coming to the end. I'm going to read you a story of Bella. So, 3-year-old Bella's frequent tantrums since the birth of her baby sister Julia brought the family to my office. Her father, Jose, began our visit with an explanation. She's just jealous and trying to get attention. He even had a solution. Maria, their mother, just needs to spend more time, special time with Bella, and she needs to set more firm limits. I felt as if he had read the book, reciting the behavior management lessons I'd learned years ago in my developmental and behavioral pediatrics fellowship. But beneath this typical framing lay a multi-layered story of loss. It emerged after about 30 minutes into an hour-long visit when we all sat together on the floor in a safe space of play and discovery. Jose had come to the United States from El Salvador as a young boy and spoke English well. Maria had joined him more recently and so relied on Jose to be her interpreter. I needed to intentionally pause to be sure she had heard and understood my questions and responses. We began the session with a period of observation of 3-month-old Julia in Maria's arms while Bella explored the box of toys. I noticed the delight mother and infant took in each other when Julia, in a quiet, alert state, captured Maria's gaze. I commented on how Maria supported her daughter through fussing to nursing to sleep with a calm confidence. The first sign of the underlying story came when Bella, losing interest in the new setting, suddenly approached her mother, who sat in a chair with a sleeping baby in her arms. I saw Maria's entire body flinch as she pulled away. She appeared startled, making an abrupt motion with her arm as if she intended to hit her child. But Jose quickly intervened, blocking his wife's movement while taking Bella's hand and distracting her with a book. In the few moments of quiet that followed, my mind began to formulate possible new explanations for the presenting problem. Into the silence, Maria softly began to weep. When I waited for an explanation, she told a story of violent discipline typical of her home culture with which she was raised. This personal violence occurred against a backdrop of community violence that she had sought to escape in coming to America. When Bella's behavior provoked her, Maria had learned to adapt at home by literally leaving the room. The reaction I had observed in her body was her body shifting into a state of fear. She appeared poised for fight or flight. Her reaction to her daughter's sudden movement revealed hidden meaning she held in her body from her early interactions with her own caregivers. Thinking back to the polyvagal theory, in my office, neither fight nor flight was an option. The primitive vagus might have kicked in response to overwhelming threat. If that were the case, Maria might have continued the visit with her physical but not emotional presence. Fortunately, as we had established a safe space in the preceding time together, she did not dissociate. She remained fully engaged to share her experience. She knew that leaving her daughter alone at a vulnerable moment was not the best approach. She was open to discussing alternatives. The visit ended on a delightful note as Maria began to giggle when Bella playfully danced a toy bear in front of her sister's face when she awoke. I experienced the crescendo of Maria's hearty laughter at this not obviously funny interaction as a kind of joyful release after navigating a moment of intense pain. So I am at the end. I'm not a graphic designer, to put all of these ideas into one diagram where we start with the conceptual frame of mismatch repair, safety, and reflective functioning, using that conceptual frame to play in the uncertainty. And often that process uncovers hidden loss, which in turn leads to moments of meeting. And as we know, we change across the lifespan. So those moments of meeting can lead to new meanings of hope and belonging, but also enhance the capacity for reflective functioning, the sense of safety, the ability to navigate mismatch and repair, leading to a positive cycle of growth and interaction. And if you are interested in some of the ideas that I went over quite quickly in that middle section, I invite you to consider joining the 18-month fellowship that we have at UMass Chan, or a new 6-month online fellowship. And if you're interested, you can reach out to me or use these contacts that are on this slide, and you'll have my PowerPoint. And then I just have to put in a plug for my new book. And if you are interested in being notified when it's available for pre-order, please feel free to email me. And that is the end. Thank you.
Dr. Gold, thank you so much. That was beautiful. I kind of just want to be quiet and listen to you talk for another half hour. That was just really, really beautiful. And I think in a time where we have so much discord around us, the idea of repairing those relationships and understanding each other's perspectives is just so profound, actually, for all of us in so many ways. And I'll just encourage everybody out there and Saw a lot of familiar names and famous names, and thank you all for being here in this community today, um, with your wisdom. And please, um, chat some questions into the Q&A bubbles. They're starting to come in, and I'll start us off here and then get to some of those. I'm wondering, Dr. Gold, this is kind of a passion of mine, but we have spent so much time as an educational system really doing what I would call kind of scripting people, like toward knowing ideas that you know this and you know that, and here are algorithms and here are ways of being, that for new trainees and seasoned professionals, this not knowing stance is not an easy one to actually get into. Do you have, and I think about this a lot, I'm just wondering, kind of in your experience with residents, with trainees of different kind, in the fellowship, are there ways that you found to encourage people toward embracing the not knowing stance, which can be a little frightening after you've spent decades knowing, and encouraged in that direction?
Yes, can be frightening and
Yes.
produce anxiety.
Yes.
Absolutely. So the first thing that comes to mind is the image of the Russian dolls, like someone needs to hold the organization, who holds the clinician, who holds the
Yeah,
family. So it does require a kind of sense of safety in your own professional role in order to be able to be comfortable not knowing. And that's hard to come by. And in fact, the knowing stance itself, I think, functions to allay anxiety.
Mhm.
So that is its explicit purpose. I mean, you don't want that, but that is what its main function often is. So not doing it, you're absolutely right, is hard. So I think things like, reflective practice, reflective supervision, holding the next layer of relationships of the direct care provider, so that they feel held in the relationship. I think that's probably, it gets into policy issues as well, because a lot of this pressure and anxiety comes from the need to see more and more patients in less and less time.
Right.
So I feel like I have to acknowledge that. But in the immediate setting, I would say a reflective practice supervisor, group supervision, those kinds of things can
Mhm.
help people feel empowered.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. We can start with a question. Thank you, John Allen, for this great question, who is wondering, does the 30-70 ratio of match to mismatch that's normative in infancy apply to adult dyads?
Well, we apply it. I have to say that the research is much easier to do with infants, because you're watching them with the video camera. Doing that kind of, I know Sue Johnson, who sadly recently passed away, I believe, did a lot of research with adults, trying to do that same kind of quantitative analysis. So I guess the bottom line answer is I don't know, because the research is really done primarily with infants. But I think there is, clinical experience as well as other research that supports, and also just living supports the idea that is applicable across the lifespan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Samantha Trotman Berman writes in, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Gold. As a parent, I found your work and teachings both humbling and hopeful. I started a business recently to support and educate and connect parents. What do you believe are ways to educate parents? Yeah, or what are your first thoughts about that in your role as a pediatrician? Yeah.
To educate parents.
Yeah, to educate parents.
Well, I'm wondering about the context, because I actually think that's not what we're doing to
Mhm.
educate parents. I think parents are educating us in the work. And so I think there is, again, not to carry it to an absurd length, a parent may want certain information, like how long can you leave breast milk out before you have to throw it away. There's certain things that you need to tell people information and educate them. But in general, in working with parents, I don't think about myself as educating them. I think about myself as listening to them and learning from them.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Just a lot in here saying wonderful talk, wonderful um, talk. There's a comment in here from Ellen Asper about not mentioning attachment theory, although I heard you reference Bowlby actually as your place that you started, and they were wondering, Ellen
Yeah.
Asper was wondering about kind of the connection with attachment with what you're doing. I think you were implying. Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that? Because
Sure,
I mean,
sure. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question because I work very closely with Ed, who tries to encourage his colleagues and students to take a broader view. I think Bowlby and the foundational attachment work, which is also all the mentalization work, came out of the attachment research. But I think the difficulty with attachment theory in real life is that it tends to be somewhat categorical and a little bit is a little risky, that people are assigned categories that involve judgment versus the ideas that I've been talking about, which are not categorical and are more process oriented and moment by moment developmental process over time. And also that it's not one or two primary caregiving figures, but 20. Like there are so many people that a child is in relationship with throughout their early years, including early childhood educators and, in cultures where there are multiple caregiving relationships, not just a mother and a father. All of those people inform that child's sense of self. So I think that that's why I try to look beyond attachment theory.
Yeah. Great. Deidre Ray is writing and asking, when does the mismatch, you're talking about this a little bit right now, but when does this mismatch become hardwired into personality disorders and not open to repair? Which probably it is, would be the idea, but your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, that's spoken from the perspective of someone who treats people with diagnoses of personality disorders, I take it, which is not me.
Right.
So I think the more problematic meanings that have been made over and over and over again in a person's lifetime, the more different and varied interactions that person needs. So that's the risk of these diagnostic categories, that they kind of capture a moment in time. And I prefer to think of it more developmentally and process oriented, that a person who carries that diagnosis has very problematic meanings embedded in them. And if we try to change it in a 1 or 2 or even 3-step process over 6 months or 2 years, we might find that is difficult. But and if you think about how those meanings are over decades, then it changes over a long period of time, and you need all sorts of kind of intervention. Or I don't like the word interventions either, but relationships, yoga. I mean, yoga is not considered primarily a form of a relationship, but it is, as you go to yoga class and you have other people who are in the yoga class, and maybe doing photography or relationships with friends or work that gives meaning. There are many different things that need to happen. So I don't give up on anyone, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for that. Denise Parent is asking a question about the Bella case and wondered if you shared the observation of the mom reacting to her daughter, or did you let her discover it herself? And says also, thank you. This was very good presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely shared it. And I think, there are many things that I left out of this talk, but one of a guiding principle for me comes from Barry Brazelton and the power of observation. And so simply describing what is happening in an interaction between a child and a caregiver can be tremendously powerful. So it's not with any kind of judgment, but just I see that when she moved close to you like that, I observed this kind of reaction in your body. And that's just observation. But that opens up this space of reflection and allows us to go into the deeper story.
Great, thank you. And another question, what types of public health interventions do you think could support infant mental health and relationship health?
Public health interventions. I'm not sure this qualifies as a public health intervention, but I would say paid parental leave. I mean, I think there are a lot of big policy issues that have direct relevance. Public health. I would say embedding people who are knowledgeable about early relational health into primary care settings is, I guess, could be considered also a public health measure. I hope these are getting at what this person is asking. Support, I mean, this is also not exactly a public health measure, but quality, accessible early childhood education and adequate support and pay for early childhood educators. These are all things that need to be done at a policy level to really shift the needle on early relational health.
No, I'm wondering, this work is so profound to me and so important and critical. I'm wondering the degree to which you're aware if it's taught to medical students, to pediatricians generally, to within most psychiatry residency training programs, psychology.
Well, no,
PhD
but
programs. Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering about that. Yeah.
It hasn't traditionally been taught, but I do have to say that this is changing significantly within the field of pediatrics just in the last 5 years or so, because spearheaded by the work of David Willis. And he is the one he was originally at the Center for Social Policy, but he's now at Georgetown University, and creating a movement of individuals from a broad range of backgrounds to embrace the use of the term and the concepts of early relational health. So in pediatrics, there was recently a policy statement, I think it was in 2021, about early relational health in the main journal of pediatrics. So within the field of pediatrics, there's definitely significant movement trying to incorporate teaching and practicing early relational health into pediatrics. You do run up against, there was an article in the Globe, I think last week, about physicians trying to unionize because they have to see so many patients to meet the bottom line, and then asking them to do this task of supporting relationships. It's very hard for physicians to hear that. So that gets back to the last question, that there's policy changes that need to happen. But to this question, yes, there are beginning to be significant shifts in pediatrics, not so much that I know of in child psychiatry, but one of the core faculty at the UMass Chan fellowship is a child psychiatrist, and we have many fellows who are child psychiatrists. So they are leading the way of the next generation to really begin to incorporate all of this knowledge into the field of child psychiatry.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Beverly Stout has written in here. I'm going to get
hello.
I'm going to get to Beverly's question here, who's wondering, can you speak to how we might use this model of repair and developing comfort with the not known, extrapolated to group dynamics, and says, I imagine this could create a revolution in how we help each other all work on conflicts related to culture, race, and historical trauma as related to our own missed experiences with repair. And if repair were the goal, instead of rationalizing the inflicting of our rage into destructiveness toward others, we could change our world. Thank you for the hope of better.
Well, Beverly, I so appreciate that question. And actually, there's a whole section of the talk that in the interest of time, I didn't include, where I really lead often. And in the book, this is the case. I lead with the relevance of this material to social justice and issues of cultural humility, because I think that that's really where the not knowing stance has its greatest power, where we live in this world where people are so angry and divided and polarized, and also making grand assumptions in the interests of that really problematic term cultural competence. And so the not knowing stance is really at the core of cultural humility, and that the way we interact with people who are different from ourselves and have different identities in any number of ways is really by anchoring ourselves in not only in not knowing, but in being okay with doing the wrong thing and messing up and having things be complicated and difficult and very uncomfortable. And that's really how I see that we can make real progress in some of these really entrenched, very painful, problematic issues that you allude to.
Beverly writes back, thank you so much for the love of our human connection that comes through in your work. Yeah, I agree that, and it's written in all caps. So thank you, Beverly. Beatrice Preter writes, I believe it's important for the therapist to give mother-father feedback in observations that can help in repairing or help in the future with family interactions. I think that's echoing really what you said. I don't know if you have any further comments about that.
Yes, but I also want to draw on the word father, because I have to say I didn't really explicitly talk about fathers in the talk, other than that the father was part of the latter vignette. So absolutely incredibly important to include co-parents in the work, and observational work with co-parents and extended family. It is so powerful. My colleague, Dominic Charles-Willie has this wonderful model called Sitting at the Feet of Storytellers, which grew out of her work with African-American families in the DC area. And the idea that you, as the clinician, you literally sit on the floor and have the family share their stories and observe and video. They actually use videotape observation to really enter into these very rich relationships that have, as I alluding to that earlier question, they have more to teach us than we have to teach them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marina Rodriguez writes, everything I have heard here resonated with my approach as an early childhood coach. I would like to know, what are the requirements to join the fellowship? Do I need to be a therapist?
You can join the fellowship. Actually, one of our current fellows is a coach. Well, no, she just graduated, so I shouldn't call her current, but it's not related to your degree, whether you enter into the fellowship. And many of the things that people do in coaching are already many of the things that I've been talking about. So as long as you're in interaction with families in a way that promotes relationships, then you would fit in very well with the fellowship.
Great. I'm wondering, Dr. Gold, do you have any kind of last bits of wisdom for us to leave us with?
Well, I guess I would say to hold the infant caregiver relationship in mind while working with adults, even though the content of the work may have nothing to do with infancy. But I hope that these models can be useful and organizing and calming in what can be the chaos of challenging moments with adult clients.
Yeah, so beautifully said. I know, I think at Silver Hill that this is so important that we're actually working with adults and adolescents, trying to attune and understand how the repair models work, and how we can help to develop a bit of resilience and self-reflection in everybody who comes through to work with us. So I just find your work so compelling and important, and want to give you a huge thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having
And
me.
there are many, many thank yous, as you can see, that are appearing in the chat as well. And yes, on the slides, there's some questions about the availability of your slides, and we will make those available to anybody who is participating. And again, if you would like continuing education credits for this, we will have a survey pop up in the browser, and just complete the evaluation, and you will receive credits. We hope you can join us again on June 12th for our grand rounds. And again, everybody, thank you for being part of our community today. Thank you, Dr. Gold, for joining us. We've been talking about connecting and attuning and responding to one another, and now we're going to have a real disruption and all go away into our own rooms and disconnect. So bye everybody, and thank you again.